Okay, I got a lot of books this month. Hi guys, so as you already know, I am here today for a book haul and I have quite a lot of books, so I'm not going to dilly-dally. This is of course my new and review book haul. I do 2 book hauls a month, one for library and secondhand books and one's for books I bought new or was sent for review by the publishers. I find that rhyming so satisfying, new and review. I'm sure nobody else cares, but it sounds really nice in my head. And as always, I'm going to start with the books I actually bought for myself, and then I will move on to the review copies. Let's start with the smallest book on my pile, and that is A Rebel's Guide to Alexandra Ty by Emma Davis. This is a tiny little non-fiction book published by Bookmarks, who are a independent bookshop based in London that also have a small press, and they have a whole series of these books which I collect. My mum started buying them for me years ago, all covering the lives of different sort of radical activists and thinkers. So I've got Rosa Luxemburg, Lenin, Trotsky, James Connolly, there's Eleanor Marx, Martin Luther King, etc, etc, and this is the latest to join their collection, which is Alexandra Ty, and I was really pleased to see that because I feel like she's like a lesser known figure. She's one of my mum's favourite authors. She was like an activist and a fiction author who played a prominent role in the Russian revolutions of the early 1900s. She was a socialist and actually involved in the founding of the original International Women's Days. So an incredible woman that I don't hear talked about a lot, and I would like to learn more about her since my mum always praises her, and I thought this would be the perfect little introduction. I also just think they're put together really well. They've always got these really nice original photos in the end papers, and I'm a big fan, so I'm looking forward to reading this one. We then have a book that I picked up in Forbidden Planet, which is my go-to place for science fiction and fantasy, and that is Desdemona and the Deep by C.S.E. Cooney. One of the things I like about Forbidden Planet is that they have displays of new fiction that's just come out from the UK and the US, and you can get books there that you wouldn't often get in your regular bookshops in the UK. So for example, these Tor novellas, which I don't really see anywhere else except for maybe Nedia Corafor because she's a bit more mainstream these days, and this one just sounded well up my street. Let me read you the blurb because I showed this to my friend Jill in the bookshop and she was just like, that is such a Jane book. A steep drop into an uncanny, richly painted underworld, Desdemona and the Deep tells the story of the spoiled daughter of a rich mining family who must retrieve the tithe of men her father promised to the world below. On the surface, her world is rife with industrial pollution that ruins the health of poor factory workers, while the idle rich indulge themselves in unheard of luxury. Below are goblins, mysterious kingdoms, and an entirely different hierarchy. So minus the underworld of goblins, this doesn't sound too dissimilar from the real world, historically and contemporary, so I'm really intrigued to read this. It's been recommended on the front by Patricia A. McKillip, who's one of my favourite fantasy authors, and it's not terribly long, so hopefully I will get to this one soon. Now, on the same day that I was book shopping with Jill in London, I also filmed a bookshop tour of my favourite indie bookshops in central London, so I'll link that down below if you haven't seen it already, and I picked up the next 2 books from some of my other favourites. The first one I got in Gaze the Word, which specialises in LGBTQ+ fiction and non-fiction. This is Black Narcissus by Rumer Godden, the haunting classic. This was actually adapted into film, which I haven't seen, but has become a bit of a cult classic, much like the book, so I was really intrigued to read it. It's been compared to Daphne du Maurier, who isn't my favourite, to be honest. I don't love her books, but I like the idea of her books. I like kind of slightly gothic, creepy historical books, so I'm hoping this one will tick the boxes that maybe Daphne du Maurier doesn't for me. It's set in a convent that's housed in a building that used to be a harem. The back of this book hints at the release of passions and the exploration of sexuality, and I assumed because this is in Gaze the Word that means the nuns have relationships with each other and that it's going to be queer, but honestly I don't actually know. However, I'm still up for trying it regardless. And then lastly, for that day I picked up a book in Housemans, which is another one of my favourite indie bookshops in London, and that is Women on the Edge of Time by Marge Piercy. This is apparently a classic feminist novel, which I had never heard of before, but I think it's just been rejacketed and is getting a bit more publicity. It originally came out in the 70s as a recommendation by Margaret Atwood, and all those things are box tickers for me. It's also set in a mental institution, so in a sort of like hospital for the insane, I believe. The main character's been incarcerated here because she believes that she can see the future, and obviously nobody believes her. However, this is a science fiction novel, so the implication is that actually she can see the future, and it's about like the silencing of female voices, which I think maybe will play a little bit on the Cassandra myth from Greek mythology. It is a bit of a timeless theme. Timeless being the optimum word there, but I'm intrigued to check this one out. I hadn't heard of it before, but it sounds really interesting. And then I picked up 2 books when I was in Edinburgh, which although were not sent to me for review, I did pick up using a book voucher that was sent to me by Books Are My Bag, which are a charitable organisation that promote the use of physical bookshops. And they very kindly, like I said, sent me a book voucher. So I spent that book voucher in Blackwell's, which is one of my favourite bookshops in Edinburgh. Jill and I always go there and we always share 3 for 2. Sometimes she gets 2 books and I get 1. Sometimes, like this time, I got 2 books and she got 1. So these are the 2 that I got. And the first one is What Happened That Night by Deanna Cameron. I think this is a YA horror thriller, which is a genre I'm super into. It's about a girl called Clara whose sister Emily has been accused of murder and her trial is impending. But apparently Clara equally has her own secret, and it's about the relationship between these 2 sisters, the secrets that they both hide, and who is the murderer, or why did this murder take place. So it sounds right up my alley. And then I actually picked up a middle grade book, which is Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crew, the second in the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. I read book 1 in this series quite a while ago, absolutely adored it, and just have not got around to book 2. I've been really in the mood for middle grade of late, so when I saw this was in 3 for 2, I decided, hey, I'm going to pick up my own copy and finally get around to reading it. It's set in a slightly surreal, magical world where this young girl, Morrigan Crew, is cursed to die on her 11th birthday, but instead is whisked away by this odd man who offers her the chance to go to this strange school for gifted children in the magical world of Nevermore instead of dying. So of course she takes him up on that offer, and book 2 follows on from that, so I'm excited to read that. We then move on to all the books I have been sent for review, which is quite a few. So let's start with one I've already read and adored, and it is of course Franklin and Luna and the Book of Fairy Tales by Jen Campbell, illustrated by Katie Hartnett. This is the 3rd and final book in the Franklin and Luna picture book series by my wonderful friend and fellow booktuber Jen Campbell. Let me show you some of the insides here. Da, da, da. The illustrations to this book are gorgeous. In fact, I just think Jen and Katie's combination of illustrations and words is perfect for one another in these stories. I love these books, and I know I'm Jen's friend, so it might be a little bit difficult to take me seriously, but truly, I probably just wouldn't mention them if I didn't like them, and I really, really do. I think they're beautiful children's books that adults will really enjoy sharing with their children, full of magic, beautiful messages about reading and learning and inclusivity and getting to know one another, and I'm always a fan. In this book, Franklin and Luna, Franklin being a dragon, Luna being a little girl, travel into the magical world of a fairy tale book and encounter some of your classic fairy tale creatures. I then have a book I was sent by Titan, which is The Girl the Sea Gave Back by Adrienne Young. This is a YA fantasy novel. Our main character Tova ended up in this village after being washed ashore there when she was a child, and is then raised by the community. She also has some sort of druidic powers which allow her to kind of see potential futures, and because of that people come to her to sort of invoke her gift. And her adoptive people, now that she's older, are trying to decide whether or not to go to war, and obviously they come to her to answer the question of what they should do, and it's about how events unfold after that. I thought this one sounded like a lot of fun. I then have A Mills and Boon, which, you know, recently I got into my historical romances specifically, and this is a historical Mills and Boon book. Mills and Boon being quite famous for their romance publications over the years. I think like their name goes hand in hand with romance literature, so I decided to request their latest publication, and this is The Lord's Highland Temptation by Diane Gaston. And for whatever reason in this book we have an Errol posing as a butler in the house of this Highland sort of aristocratic women in Scotland, and of course they fall in love. Like, what more do you want? What I'm really excited about from this book is to check out more historical romance writers, because at the moment I'm like a diehard Tessa Dare fan, but I haven't read that many other authors, so I'm looking to dabble elsewhere. The next two books I was sent by Comma Press, which are an independent publisher, and I'm really intrigued by them because they are both by Palestinian writers, which is somewhere I've never read any own voices literature from. So the first one is The Sea Clock and Other Stories, and this is a short story collection. Love the front cover of this, I think it's beautiful. The stories in this collection are drawn from the author's own experiences of growing up as a young woman in Gaza, about the conflict that everyday Palestinians face, and I think it will be really informative to read something, like I said, by an own voices author from a country that is in such turmoil and people face so much danger on an everyday basis. We then have Palestine plus 100 stories from a century after the Nakba, edited by Basma Galiina, and this is by various different authors. So according to the back, it says Palestine plus 100 poses a question to 12 Palestinian writers. What might your country look like in the year 2048? A century after the tragedies and trauma of what has come to be called the Nakba. How might this event, which in 1948 saw the expulsion of over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs from their homes, reach across a century of occupation, oppression and political isolation to shape the country and its people? I think this book is going to do what I think science fiction does best, and that is explore real contemporary and historical issues through possible futures. So I'm really intrigued to read this one. I then have two short story collections which are much closer to home because they are all about Scottish folklore, and these were sent to me by the History Press. And can we just admire these covers for a moment? Just take a second, stare at them and go, wows, because they are beautiful. The first one is East Lothian Folktales for Children, and being from Edinburgh, East Lothian is a lot more closer to home than, say, like Highland folklore, etc, etc. I thought it would be nice to see if I know any of these stories from my childhood and maybe just learn some new ones. And then we have this gorgeous hardback book called The Anthology of Scottish Folktales, which may be of particular interest to some of you because I've been asked before for book recommendations of just general Scottish folklore, and this one seems like such a lovely bind up of traditional Scottish stories. And one of the things I enjoy about this is that it has a little map of Scotland here with the different sort of areas marked on it and telling you where each of the stories is from. So we have two East Lothian stories in here, but then we also have stories from Orkney, Aberdeenshire, Argyll, the Highlands, Western Islands, Shetland, Perthshire, Fife, the Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, and Midlothian, which is where I'm technically from. But whilst we're on the topic of the History Press, they actually sent me one more book, and that is A History of the World with the Women Put Back In, which I think is such a fabulous concept because as a historian I am quite aware of the way in which women are often overlooked. A lot of the time because men write the texts that then come down to us, so we then get focused on who they're talking about and kind of forget, you know, there was like another 50% of the population existing in that time period, and perhaps their voices aren't always being represented by those male-dominated texts. And I really like the idea of a kind of like history of the world, but with the world put back in. And it is a history of the world that goes back to prehistoric times, Neolithic times, all the way up into the 1900s. So I think this would be a really good introduction for people that are interested in history and feminism and women's history and just history actually, because you know history isn't just about what men did, it's about what everybody did. The next book I am so excited about, and that is A Kin by Emma Donoghue. I love Emma Donoghue. She's one of my favourite authors, and this is her latest book to come out, and it's also her first contemporary novel since Room. So most of Emma Donoghue's books are actually historical fiction. Room was a bit of an outsider, although it became one of her most popular books, and she's returned to sort of contemporary times for this latest novel, which follows an 11-year-old boy, at least an 11-year-old boy and his great uncle who go off travelling together to Nice to explore like their family history, and it's about the secrets they learn about their family through this adventure, I guess. I love, like I said, Emma Donoghue's writing. And to be honest, the blurb of this book isn't something that necessarily would have caught my eye immediately if it was by another author. But the fact that it's by Emma Donoghue makes me want to read it, and I like that that then makes me try something new because I trust that author and kind of want to see what they've done with this storyline. So yeah, so pleased to have this. Thank you so much to Pan Macmillan for sending me a copy. I love Emma Donoghue. That's all I have to say on that topic for now. But we're still not done. I then have a non-fiction book called Now We Have Your Attention, The New Politics of the People by Jack Schenker. And I mean, if that isn't like an impactful cover, I'm not sure what is. This one says, Now We Have Your Attention, make sense of what is happening in British politics by taking a radical different perspective. The people's! From a warehouse in Manchester to a pub in Essex, from the outskirts of Glasgow to a racecourse in Durham, Jack Schenker uncovers the root cause of our current crisis and the future direction of British politics through the lives of ordinary individuals. So I'm hoping that this one really does encompass different perspectives and isn't just about what like pollsters and politicians and journalists think, because if you want to understand what's going on in a country, you need to ask the people that are living in it. And it's also been recommended by Owen Jones, who is a journalist and writer I thoroughly trust, whose books I absolutely adore. So if he's recommended this book, it makes me think that it is going to be a decent piece of political journalism. So yes. We then have a big book, and that is Drawing Power, Women's Stories of Sexual Violence, Harassment and Survival. And this is from Abrams and Chronicles, and it is a collection of different comic book artists exploring experiences of sexual violence. So we have various different contributors in these pages, and as I'm sure you're aware at this point, my PhD focuses on sexual violence in a historical setting in antiquity. However, I do like to read outside of my discipline and to educate myself on this topic and different people's experiences. So I think this will be a really interesting way to like ingest that information, if that makes sense, if that's a way of expressing comic books, you know what I mean. Then we have Number One Chinese Restaurant by Lillian Lee. This is a book about two families who are both involved in the running of a Chinese restaurant that has been going for decades, has a very loyal customer base, and I think it's about how the two younger generations find themselves in a dangerous game that means tragedy for the Duck House, and family secrets start to come out and tensions start to unravel, and it's meant to be a combination of like comedy and drama, so I thought it sounded really interesting. We then have two last books which I got at a Penguin Viking event. So Penguin Viking held an event for some of their newer releases and up-and-coming releases, and I picked up two of those. The first one is already out, and that is Witch Elm by Tana French. I've never actually read any Tana French, and I know she's a very popular author, so I'm glad I have one of her books now. The back tells me that one night changes everything for Toby. He's always led a charmed life until a brutal attack leaves him damaged and traumatised, unsure even of the person he used to be. He seeks refuge in his family's ancestral home, the Ivy House, filled with memories of wild strawberry summers and teenage parties with his cousins. But not long after Toby's arrival, a discovery is made, a skull tucked neatly inside the old witch elm in the garden. As detectives begin to close in, Toby is forced to examine everything he thought he knew about his family, his past and himself. I think this one would fall into the category of literary thriller, which sounds perfect for this time of year. And equally another literary thriller published by Viking is Keeper by Jessica Moore. This one is not out till the beginning of 2020, so it's a little while before you'll be able to get your hands on it, but it does sound very good, and it has been recommended by Jeanette Winterson, who is one of my favourite authors. It's about a woman who worked at a women's refuge centre and is found dead. The police believe it's suicide, but the women she worked with and the women she helped at the refuge don't believe this. And we hear from all of these different women about their interactions with the woman that's been found dead, Katie, and their thoughts on what's happened, and build up the story of Katie through all of their different stories. And it's kind of being dubbed as a bit of a feminist thriller, and there is an issue with thriller TV and books where female characters are often props, and we don't really ever get to know them as characters. They become tropes, and this book is kind of turning that on its head, which sounds absolutely fabulous and exactly what I want from a thriller. So I'll be really, really interested to read this one. And that's it! Those are all the books! How long will this video be? Who knows, but hopefully you have enjoyed. every minute of it as much as I have enjoyed filming every minute of it. I'd love to hear from you if you have read or are interested in reading any of the books I've mentioned in this video. Everything, as always, will be linked in the description box down below. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!